Thank you for joining us tonight for our program, Call and Response, Larry Steger's Archives and Lasting Legacy. I'm Jeannie Long, Executive Director of Chicago Collections Consortium, and I'm pleased to be hosting this program in conjunction with UIC Gallery 400's current exhibit, Reckless Rolodex. For those of you listening tonight who are in Chicago, I encourage you to stop by Gallery 400, which is located at 400 South Peoria Street, and see the exhibit as it will be closing soon on March 18th. The exhibit highlights Steger's legacy and impact through the works of contemporary artists, many of whom we'll be speaking with tonight. Please note that tonight's program will be recorded and available for viewing again on Chicago Collections website. We'd like to begin our program tonight with Chicago Collections Land Acknowledgement Statement, which reads, Chicago Collections acknowledges and is grateful for the Native peoples who laid the foundation for the city of Chicago and for the diverse indigenous nations that reside in Chicago today. When you visit our member organizations and when you experience Chicago outdoor spaces, we invite you to join in offering respect and gratitude to the many indigenous peoples that reside in the Chicagoland region, as well as their ancestors. If you're joining us tonight for the first time, Chicago Collections is a consortium of over 60 libraries, museums, and cultural organizations, all working together for the preservation and promotion of Chicago history and culture. Now, we do that through our flagship initiative, Explore Chicago Collections Portal, which provides free and open access to our members' archival holdings. We invite you to check out Chicago Collections Explore Portal and our events page for a complete listing of upcoming programs. Tonight's event is being presented as part of Art Design Chicago Now, an initiative funded by the Terra Foundation for American Art that amplifies the voices of Chicago's diverse creatives, past and present, and explores the essential role they play in shaping the now. Chicago Collections is extremely grateful for the continued support of the Terra Foundation, as this program is one of many discussions they have made possible. Please check out the Art Design Chicago Now website for upcoming events. I'm pleased tonight to be speaking with Reckless Rolodex co-curator Matthew Goulish and several of the artists participating in the exhibit that include Max Guy, Cherrie Yu, Devin T, John Neff, and Mark Jeffery. I know our time tonight will go by quickly, so let's get started. And as a reminder to our listeners, we hope to have time at the end for questions at the end of our discussion, so please feel free to post them and direct those to the Q&A. Let's begin our conversation with Matthew, and then we can jump on and speak to the artists as well. So Matthew, when we look at when you think of the exhibit Reckless Rolodex and it being curated by yourself, Lynn Hickson, and Caroline Picard, how did the three of you come up with this unique idea of expressing legacy and response and formulating that? And, you know, how did the three of you come about in the selection of the artists on this theme?
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Jeannie. Thank you for hosting this event. For many years, I've been writing about Lawrence Steger's work, and Caroline had seen some of that writing. It was Caroline Picard's idea to generate an exhibition around Lawrence's work. Caroline had been a co-operator of an art venue for many years called Sector 2337 up on Milwaukee Avenue. And Lynn Hickson and I had curated some performance work in that space. And so the three of us had worked together before. But I had no experience curating an exhibition like this. So Caroline really guided us in many ways. And I would say the other very important factor was that very early on, UIC's Gallery 400 committed to the exhibition. And that was important because that gallery has a very specific sort of architecture. It's got one large gallery, 3 small galleries, and very, in my mind, very non-neutral sort of space. So we had Lynn and I from the beginning had proposed to Caroline that we collect a sort of constellation of artists who were unfamiliar with Lawrence's work, so that the exhibition from the outset would be responsive, or would be a kind of way of migrating that legacy either to new generations or just to new circles of people who could look at it as if for the first time. There were a couple of important exceptions to that rule. One was Susan Anderson, because we knew we wanted that iconic photograph that Susan had taken, that official portrait that we saw in one of your earlier screens. We knew we wanted that, needed that in the exhibition. And the other exception is Mark Jeffery, who's with us tonight, who also knew Lawrence. Then we can say more about that later. But
I do think that delicate balance in how that's the energy with all of the artists that participate in the exhibit too, that you didn't have to know about Lawrence Steger's work to be excited. It was that delicate creative balance of you know, that a viewer can be excited about in terms of the themes that, if you did know Larry's work, would speak to that as a viewer, in terms of, oh, it made me think about previous performances or previous work that way too. So I just thought it was a real fascinating approach to curation, because it was the added bonus of those that had a deep knowledge of, you know, the Chicago performing art scene at that time and his work at that time, but that energy that these artists in the exhibit brought forth. So
absolutely, yeah.
That was very, very thoughtful and
well
orchestrated.
Yeah, I felt that I, in each case, needed to be able to sort of make a connection to some aspect of Lawrence's work, and very shortly, as the 3 different curators each brought different artists and suggested different people, and very soon there seemed to be a kind of deconstructed performance, that constellation that seemed to be forming, and I just want to say, very key to that was the sort of stage platform that Edie Fake designed in conversation with us. That's very central, because Edie couldn't join us tonight. So just to say a quick word about that, it was very, most of Edie's work is sort of imaginative, virtual, utopian spaces, and very rarely is it ever an actual concrete physical manifestation. And it was amazing to us that Edie wanted to accept that invitation to design a stage, because that in many ways is emblematic of a lot of the work in the show, which in my mind is like a show that risks sort of looking west or looking to the setting sun. It's important to have artists who are looking sort of east, sort of looking to the rising sun or to the future, who don't have the same relationship to the past as maybe I do. And so there's a sort of a kind of dissonance, or a kind of friction of mourning and also celebrating. Kind of
Exactly. It's that that balance which results in a harmony too. So when you speak of, you know, 3 curators and the creative energies and talents all working together, that, you know, it was just that great union, you know, that resulted in all of this. So no, I just hope people can get in before the 18th and see the exhibit and this work. But when we talk about lasting legacies and archives, Matthew, like for the 3 of you what did you have access for in terms of Larry's archives to share, and how did you go about
Yeah.
capturing that?
Well, yeah, so there's no sort of official archive of Lawrence's work. It was just bits and pieces that were saved by friends and collaborators that valued it. And some of that was given to me in 1999. His writing files came to me. I've had access to them since then. But when we came to put this exhibition together, Douglas Grew was instrumental, who had been really Larry's closest collaborator in performance. And so I had some files, and Douglas had a different set of materials. And we spent a lot of time thinking about, because, you know, there's an archive room, a resource room in the exhibition, and Lorelei Stewart at Gallery 400 was really encouraging us to make sure that Lawrence actually had a presence in the exhibition. And we thought of the portrait for that, and also the resource room. So Douglas and I spent a lot of time looking over everything and making selections that would be sort of both convincing to people who had been there and interesting for people who didn't know anything about that time. You know, I think about Henry James, the novelist, talked about what he called the visitable past, which is a past kind of memory becoming history, which is a past that some people alive still remember, but other people are too young to know. And it's a sort of margin of time that that hasn't quite faded yet away into history, that still has a sort of feel, palpable, that can be visited somehow.
Well, and looking at in that resource room too, you really did capture, I mean, as a viewer to the exhibit, the feeling of what was going on in the 80s and 90s on the performance scene, and as seen through, you know, the work of Larry and some of the documentation too, which was really fascinating to at a quick glance. It was a lot of a recall for those of us who were on, remember those times in Chicago too. So no, it was a really nice compliment to the exhibit.
I mean, it was important to us. I'll just say maybe two quick things about that. I don't mean to offend any of the amazing videographers out there, but I really am not, I don't really like performance video. I think it's good for the performers to sort of remember what they did, but I find a good still photograph much more compelling, and somehow capturing the video more accurately, capturing the performance more accurately. So we didn't have any video. We decided early on not to do that, but just to have sort of objects, and also, in addition to like all the programs and posters and postcards and things, to include some sort of unofficial objects, like that we didn't even understand completely what they were. Maybe just like a random snapshot of Larry arriving at the Sarajevo airport, for example, or a sort of pseudo business card that he had made up for one of his many performance projects, F Troop, and to just have those mixed in with the more official kind of documentation. And I think, of course, there's the infamous fruitcake that came to us. Certain things came to us, like, for example, the actual Rolodex appeared.
That's the night of the opening, right?
At the opening, very generously, the photographer Gene Dunning, which I didn't know, had traded Lawrence a photograph for that actual performance prop that the exhibition is partly named after. And so as word got out, people started, supplying surprising us with objects like that. And they're in the exhibition now.
To that point, I mean, that's just, it could not stress this enough in terms of archives and what Chicago Collections is about in terms of preserving and sharing and sources of, not only documentation, but for future generations too. And Matthew, speaking to you as a performance artist too, how have you thought of preserving your own work?
Yeah.
And sharing that for future generations, or have you?
I mean, I hope there are future generations. I've thought about, I mean, one of the reasons people do performance, I think, is because it doesn't pile up a lot of objects. Like it's because it is ephemeral. So it's a little bit of a paradox to try to archive it. But I think about, maybe I inherited this, like, I think about like my mother's like photo album, where it's like obsessively tracked, like name everybody who's in the photo and who took it, and and just try to like keep whatever you do save to make sure it's sort of self-contained and sort of explains itself, and then go to the Container Store and put it in something that's going to take care of it, and then just like a time capsule, that's sort of self-explanatory. But now, I mean, now so many documents are just purely electronic. And so archiving is really it's more of a sort of act of backing up, I guess, or migrating electronic files to the most current sort of memory storage. That's okay too, I think. But I guess the most important thing is just sort of, I've always had a kind of faith that at some point in the future, somebody would think that this is of value. And you have to think that way. That maybe your audience hasn't been born yet, and so you
Absolutely.
You kind of try to just frame it in such a way that a person stumbling on it. I think about works that I found when I was young in some box in a library somewhere, and how they spoke to me, just because they were sort of self-contained kernels of creativity.
Should we jump in and start giving some time to the artists here?
Yes. Yeah, so Max Guy is one of the artists that that Caroline and Lynn and I thought of immediately for this exhibition, partly because of the work that Max had done with masks, and the connection that we could make to Lawrence's work and performance, and so maybe that's just a transition.
But yes, Max, tell us about the piece. And
yeah, also thanks for thinking of me. But it's kind of funny that you said that one of the reasons that people do performance is because they don't accumulate a lot of objects, because I really like accumulating objects, apparently. And I tend to make the objects for performances. So the piece that's, on the screen right now is a mask per se. It's actually kind of a dual mask of what's called sock and buskin. So it's a kind of symbol of, like within theater, typically you'll see a smiling mask and a sad mask, these two expressions next to each other. That is kind of eliminated, that the expressive component is kind of eliminated from this composition, because what I did was I created a number of lap joints from sheets of paper. And I work with paper a lot, and a lot of my work kind of stems from thinking through collage. and kind of like a deconstruction of collage, you know. So either cutting paper, reconnecting very kind of disjointed and displaced thoughts, objects, people, etc., and creating compositions that way. So actually, I think when I met, the way that I met Caroline and Lynn and Matthew is through this interest in performance and creating kind of compositions of people and objects and ideas, which is something that I've just been kind of working through. So this mask, yeah, sock and buskin is cut paper, and it's butcher's twine, which I have like this spool right here. I've just had this for like a decade. And so it's very near and dear to my heart. And what can I say about the work? So the silhouette itself is inspired by this book that I have called Introduction to Carving. It's a book that teaches you, you know, I guess the elementary elements of carving no masks. And one thing that I've been pretty, I guess, invested in the last couple of years is no theater, because of, yeah, I suppose this kind of meeting of like dance and poetry and reading and movement. And when I saw no theater for the first time, it was really one of the, I think, few times that I felt like real awe in my life. Like I just felt like I was crazy or something. It was really pretty amazing. I like wanted to howl or something while the people were singing. And so I took it very seriously. And so I've been trying to approach it for a very long time. And so in my studio, I have a bunch of blocks of wood all over the place, but I've been really scared to actually carve them. So one of the things that I started doing was, from this book, I noticed that there are these pages that'll show you all of the silhouettes that you can use to carve each side of a mask. And I chose the Doji mask as my inspiration. Doji is an archetype in no theater that represents eternal youth. So it's the mask of a young man's face. And then the character is typically a god or a spirit or a demon in disguise. I've been interested in two masks in particular, the Doji mask and the Juroku mask, which means 16, I believe, in Japanese. And so that's the mask of a person who has died too young, at a tragic young age. So as a kind of juxtaposition, I suppose that's where the two faces of the sock and buskin came from.
Amazing.
But I noticed that they, you know, make these silhouettes. And I said to myself, oh, I can make silhouettes. I do that all the time. That's like kind of, that's seemingly where I've landed, you know, over the years. And so this is like the first version of that mask. So what you can't see, I guess, in the photo is the dimension. And this one's fallen apart. So there are some sides that are missing. And so I cut them by hand, and I just think about how the accumulation of silhouettes can create dimension. So this is me kind of building my way up to actual wood carved masks or other forms. But for the most part, I work with silhouettes, and it gives me time at least to think about the theater and think about the performance. These two are actually conjoined by a couple of thin lines. You can't see them there, but the edges of the masks are actually conjoined. So it's almost like two faces. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking it doesn't do its justice in terms of the construction, the image shown, but I mean, I really, what rang to me too, in terms of, you know, the passing of early on of someone too, and going through in the resource room, you're like, Larry, Larry left us too early. You know, what could have been? And so speaking to that in the mass, it's a nice layer that way.
I think maybe I'll ask one thing, which is, or I'll just mention one last thing, which is just, I think as far as like archival practices in theater and performance go, this mask, I think, would be very difficult to take care of, because I used a kind of rag paper that is both rigid, but it's also very delicate. And so I spray painted the paper. So it looks metallic, but that's just because it's silver spray paint. But you touch it and the paint immediately comes off. It's very dusty and it smells.
Amazing.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
And Cherrie?
I think we thought about, so some of the works in the exhibition, like the piece that Max was just speaking about, were made new for the exhibition in relation to dialogues that we had. Cherrie's piece pre-existed the exhibition, and we thought of that one very specifically because it has a sort of, it creates a kind of feedback loop of choreography and labor and mimicry that all seem to speak very clearly to Lawrence's legacy. But you could talk about that, Cherrie.
When Jeannie sent us the program, I saw that we're supposed to talk for 6 minutes, and I thought that was really long, so I wrote a script. So I apologize if it's not as spontaneous.
Oh, no worries.
So the prompt is to talk about how the work of Lawrence Steger influenced my own work. So I was thinking about this prompt and how I should go about it. And I was thinking about it very hard because I hadn't heard about the work of Lawrence Steger before I was invited to be a part of this exhibition. And it was only after that I was told about the exhibition that I went online to look up some of his works. And I looked at some documentations of his past performances, and I got to know about his eccentric, yet very fluid, very charismatic, and very verbal performance style. But then I also thought, who am I to decide whether my work has been influenced by the work of Lawrence Steger or not? Maybe I don't really know what that means. So I went back to reread the blurb that Matthew had written about my work in relation to Steger's work, and the part that stood out to me is this idea of a transparent form of lip sync or drag mimicry in which the performer wears the materials lightly and transparently. Watching Steger's performance documentation, I gathered that he was a master performer. He seemed so comfortable with words, and he was able to shift the mood of a performance so imperceptibly, yet in a very muscular manner. He was the type of performer who can really influence the crowd or lead them. His audience, although not visible, felt to me like a flock of sheep who followed wherever the grass was green, and they were so tickled by Steger's charisma and jokes, or non-jokes. So I gathered that Steger was a performer who was not afraid of words, and he was not afraid of people, two things that I am very much afraid of, and two things that I also use in my own work. I have always liked movements, and I like doing movements. And if I can do movements and not talk, I would most often choose that. So when I saw Trisha Brown's performance, Accumulation with Talking plus Water Motor, I was very struck by it because she had not only decided to talk, but at the same time that she was dancing two very different solos intermittently. Her body was like a memory machine and very human skill at the same time. I asked myself if I would consider myself a drag artist or a drag performer. And then I thought the framework of a reenactment artist is more apt. But why making up these labels? I think that Homero, the performer in my film, in this screenshot, would possibly agree with me that to devise categories to say that one is this, one is that, or not this or not that, is not so interesting activity. For example, Homero understands mopping. He can mop very efficiently. He understands the idea of getting something done instead of talking about getting something done. He understands dancing and the feeling of dancing to music and explaining that feeling to me. For him and for me too, these things don't necessarily have to be separated. And when we talked about them going from one thing to the next, it was almost like in a dance where each movement is presented sequentially and or treated without different value judgments. As a reenactment artist, I often like to hide behind other people's movements and personalities because that has been my way to learn something. In order to work through an idea, I have to experience it or embody it in order to digest. In my late teens and early 20s, I studied English literature, and that academic literary process has always been the opposite. In order to know a text or to understand a piece of literature, one develops an argument about it, analyzes it, and takes bits and pieces from the text as evidence to corroborate one's argument. Perhaps my approach to performance tries to walk back this know-it-all literary approach that was taught to me in my formative years, and instead I learned to wear the material lightly and transparently. However, now I am recalling an instance where a literature teacher that I especially liked, who taught the course lesbian fiction, and for the final assignment of the class, this professor encouraged us to submit multimedia projects instead of an essay. So 3 other classmates and I made a moving image adaptation of the 1872 Gothic novella Carmilla, one of the early works of vampire fiction, telling the story of a young woman who was seduced and preyed upon by the lesbian vampire Carmilla. For reasons I cannot remember today, I was casted as the vampire Carmilla. And the other day, while watching the clips of Lawrence Steger's performance, Incorruptible Flesh, a collaborative work with Ron Athey, I all of a sudden had this flashback of my 20-year-old self wearing fake fangs and a black cape, running down the street of Colonial Williamsburg at the midnight hour toward a video camera and revealing my fangs as the lens pulled into a close-up. That was the end. Thank you.
Amazing.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Cherrie.
Cherrie. So Devin T. Mays is an artist who Lynn Hickson brought to the attention of Caroline Picard and myself. And we were very drawn to Devin's sort of a branch or a thread of Devin's work that's very responsive, sort of site responsive interventions, and had a dialogue, and this piece that involved instructions and a sort of caretaking approach on the part of the gallery staff was was what came up, and maybe Devin could talk about that.
Yeah, tell us more.
Sure. Well, my introduction to Lawrence's work was from Caroline, Lynn, and Matthew, and from our many conversations over the course of the last several months leading up to the show. And there was some encouragement to think about what are some other ways I might want to introduce new possibilities into the practice that might show up here. And one of the things that I was thinking about coming out of a previous work that was installed for an exhibition at the Logan Center for the Arts at on UChicago's campus was the idea of a score, or score as a form. Essentially what the work was, you kind of created a condition that I kept having to respond to. And that call and response, if you will, created this kind of movement. But I was very much responsible for the score. I was very much responsible for the movement. I was very much responsible for what would happen and what wouldn't happen. And so when this opportunity came up, I said, well, what if this score opened up? So I wasn't the only caretaker, and I wasn't the only one that was responsible for the movement or the work performing. And that's when I was telling a story, or sharing a story with Caroline, Lynn, and Matthew about how my pops would collect water in this like drip pan in our home in Detroit. And he would it would be condensation from like, I don't know, home appliances, leaky things. And he would use that water that's collected in this pan, if you could imagine like a tinfoil pan, and then use it to water the plants. And he thought that that was just like, that water was special. You know, he actually has like a container, if you could imagine a handwritten gallon container that says like plant water. And I knew that that water came from these drip pans. And so I was thinking about how that my pop's practice of collecting water kept coming back to me. And I started thinking more about score, and started thinking about collaboration, and started thinking about not just performing, but something being in performance. I think that was one of the things that I took from the stories listening to Lynn and Matthew, was that Lawrence's practice was a life practice. It was something he was always, I won't even say doing, it always was, it always is. And I think that's something that I aspire to have in my own work, to kind of work with the things that are always happening, and how to maybe invite collaboration into those things that are always happening. And so I had the notion of maybe kind of bringing the idea of the drip pan into the gallery. And so what we're looking at right now is actually one of three vessels, as I call them, that's in the gallery. This one in particular is actually my grandmother's punch bowl. She died maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, and I was given, or I asked for, I should say, her crystal and her punch bowl set. And I haven't used it since she passed. I always thought to myself, like, how would I use this thing? Would I actually put punch in it? You know, would I invite people over to make things with it? And I thought this would be a great opportunity to kind of bring something that was given to me, or something that I kind of inherited from someone that was very close to me and that I care for, and using that as maybe a way to kind of introduce this collaboration, introduce this score. So there's my grandmother's punch bowl. There's also a plastic white, like a bucket that you would see underneath the sink. Funny enough, when I was going to my apartment to pick up this punch bowl, there was this bucket that my neighbor had when he was trying to catch, you know, leaky water from his faucet in his kitchen. I was sitting outside, and I asked, could I borrow it? And he was like, sure, of course you can have it, knowing that I was going to use it for this exhibition. And the third container is actually a container that was given to me, or I would say was used for to carry food in, to carry fruit in. And so I think it was those 3 containers that are not necessarily, they don't share a story beyond me. They're all kind of connected to me in a way. But as far as kind of like their value, as far as their look, one's made of crystal, one made of plastic, and the other one is made of glass. And I think all 3 of them having these distinct different forms are also very important to me, but they could all hold the same substance. So the water, then it was like, well, how do I where do I figure out how to put the water in this thing? And there is a store, and I can't remember the name of the store. And if Eli's on this Zoom call, if you can remember the name of the store, would you mind like typing it? But there's a store on 75th Street, not that far from my apartment, like 75th and King Drive. And inside this store, this kind of like herbal holistic store, they sell small bottles of water with like different, I would say, I don't even call them names or different goals or different kind of like intentions on them. So one might say rest or peace or something like this. And I immediately kind of thought about this store and I was like, well, there's a store full of water, full of intention, that somebody has kind of like decided that this particular container of water has this intention on it. And I was like, oh, that's the water I'll use for these containers. And the one that I grabbed was Harmony, the word harmony is written on it, which I thought was apropos for the exhibition. And so getting back to this notion of the score, and I knew that I was, this time I wasn't going to be, I'm back and forth right now between Chicago and Houston. And I knew I wasn't going to be able to be in Chicago. And maybe this is an opportunity to kind of have the staff to feel like they can also kind of care for this thing that I've cared for so long. And I don't even know if they even knew this is my grandmother's punch bowl. I just said it was just a bowl that's here. But allowing myself permission to kind of entrust that process and that experience with somebody else. And so the instructions that was left for them, I'll read them to you briefly, and I guess I'll end there. Dear caretaker, on the occasion of the exhibition, Reckless Rolodex, I have placed 3 vessels throughout Gallery 400. Each vessel varies in size, shape, and color. However, each vessel resting on the gallery floor will share the same responsibility of holding the same substance. For the duration of the exhibition, each vessel will contain a specific mixture of water. I am hoping you will assist me in making that mixture, then distributing those contents to their respective places. There's a glass pitcher that should be used to distribute the mixture to each vessel. Vessels should be filled approximately halfway. No need to be precise. I trust your assessment of the appropriate volume. There's also no need to follow a rigid refilling schedule. All I ask is that water remain in the vessels. How to mix the water before distribution. 1 capful of the contents from the small plastic bottle bearing the words harmony should be placed into the glass pitcher. Once the contents of the small plastic bottle have been placed into the glass pitcher, the pitcher can be filled with water. Tap water is sufficient. Once the glass pitcher is full, contents can be distributed to the resting vessels, on the gallery floor. If contents of the small plastic bottle empties before the ending of the exhibition, please refill the bottle with tap water and repeat the process. Thank you for your care. And that was left for, so also a huge thank you to the staff that they've been emailing me like, oh, wait, like it's empty. Like we don't, what should we do? And they were like, oh, wait, the instructions, you know? And
you had said they were really respectful and
they totally were. They were amazing. So
which is great. And also, Devin, Alyssa had said KMT Health Food Store.
KMT Health Food Store. Yes, thank you, Eli, for that. KMT Health Food Store, and thank you to Eli too for like helping me with the install of this too, and kind of talking it through with me. In fact, she was the one that gave me that 3rd vessel that was filled with I think it was like watermelon. I believe like for like a walk we were going to take or something like that later on that day in the summer. So anyway, that's essentially how the work has been working since it's been installed. And like, I don't know, I've learned so much from it since it's been there. So thank you, Caroline, Matthew, and Lynn, for allowing me to do this. It's been good.
Thank you. Thank you, Devin.
Thanks, Devin.
Yeah, we thought about John Neff very early in the curation process as an artist who has a masterful approach to the way archives are always already alive. And this is a new piece that was made for the exhibition.
Matthew, are you going to ask me a question to begin the process? Or should I'll say thank you. Thank you, Jeannie. Thank you, Matthew, Lynn, and Caroline. And I'd want to echo Devin's appreciation for the Gallery 400 staff. My work has required a lot of care also, and they've been really wonderful about it. So I really appreciate that. It's nice when somebody calls you to tell you that your artwork is broken, rather than having a friend text you and let you know. So really nice people. And I like anytime that I'm involved in an exhibition where there's ongoing attention to the work, which is the way I've always felt, or it seems that I've always felt about the work of Robert Blanchard. I've been making projects that use his work as a source since 2011. I've been particularly interested in how to exhibit his work, either as his work or as my work or as some kind of hybrid, when the source material is incomplete or somehow partial in another way, maybe part of it's lost. So I've been working with Robert's work since 2011, and it's this idea of how to present the partial work that interests me, or the gone work. And a lot of the pieces that I've done inspired by Robert's work or with Robert's work have involved the creation of what I think of as of yesterday, what I think of as open channels. So the show that I did with his piece Aroma in 1981 and 2011 modified this visual aids monograph from 2006 about his work as an open channel, an open book that was an artist book that could be added to at any time and has been added to over the course of the past 12 years. And this piece involved the creation of a radio station, Robert Blanchard Radio. Blanchard graduated from SAIC with an MFA in 1989. He died back here in Chicago in 1999, the same year that Lawrence Steger died. 1988, great Chicago film, Child's Play, the first Chucky movie, appeared, in which the Sullivan Building, formerly Carson Peary Scott, now Target, has a prominent role. My mother, when I was a child, worked in the Sullivan Building. In fact, her office was on the very same floor that the SAIC Sullivan Galleries formerly occupied. Not sure how that's relevant, but I think it feels relevant to me. All right, so for this piece, Matthew and Lynn and Caroline asked me to make a work, and I immediately became fixated on this mural that Robert had made in 1995, where he created a wall painting based on the promotional image for the film Jaws, with a kind of this rampant shark that's coming towards a swimmer on the surface of the water. It's a female swimmer in the original poster and on the book cover. In this mural, Robert replaced the swimmer with a self-portrait. So the idea was to somehow recreate the mural. What ended up happening was that I got very caught up on the background color in this in the 1995 photographs of the mural, and trying to identify what that background color was. and talking to a lot of people who had worked with Robert. Judith Kirshner told me that he was fixated on this wall color beaver, which it turns out was a kind of brownish gray, so not this color at all. But I retained that as an element of the project. The piece is called Shark and Beaver. So they're both toothy water animals. So as I was trying to figure out what this background color was for this mural, I scanned the page that I just showed you and matted out the images. And basically what I was going to make was just a painted wall. And then about a week with this radio in the middle, which was meant to describe the painting. About a week before the show, a boyfriend of mine and I were working on the piece, and I said to him, I feel like maybe it's a little boring. And he said, you know, I think it might be a little boring. And I said, you know what I should do? I should just use these silhouettes. And so that's why the silhouettes are there. But it ended up working well because all of the verbal material, which is actually not a description of the painting, but a reading of an essay by Robert Blanchard called Never Realized, which is about a never realized work of his, that plays in this radio that you see in the body of the swimmer. It's broadcast from across the room. So the sound sort of animates, fills in the images rather than being a description of the images. So that's 6 minutes right there. I could say more, but that's probably enough.
Thank you so much, John.
And John, just hearing the name Robert Blanchard, it's immediately in preparation for the program tonight, who I thought of in that time, again, back to that time in Chicago too, and the interesting things that were happening. And no, it's a really amazing piece.
So we knew from the beginning that we wanted Adam R. in the performance program. And here you see a photo that also shows you Edie Fake's stage. And as I said at the beginning, Mark Jeffery is one exception to the artists in the exhibition who largely did not know Lawrence or his work. But I'll let Mark talk now.
Thank you, Jeannie. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Caroline. This has been a real gift to Judd and I. Judd is currently in New Zealand texting me AR images of a tree, for example. I'm like, get off the phone. I think for us, we were trying to embody and channel ghosts and thinking very specifically about the 90s. Is this Basil? As a 23-year-old, I first came to Chicago on the 4th of September in 1996 and met Larry through Matthew picking me up at the airport and bringing me to the Bite Cafe, where I was fortunate to meet Larry. Larry had a very important influence on a lot of British artists, having traveled with Goat Island in the 90s. At the same time, I came to Chicago because Goat Island was performing How Dear to Me, the Hour When Daylight Dies, which again is a lot about the dead. Judd and I, through Douglas posting on Facebook, I Love the Dead performance, allowed us to think about that as a place to respond to. In January, Judd and I were very fortunate through the kindness of Nick Wiley, who's on this call, to go to Co-Prosperity and Cat Skills to be able to develop the work. So this is a piece that we literally developed over the course of around about 3 months. We deliberately wanted to perform on the 14th of February, Valentine's Day. And we began to think about the vernacular. And also on this call, somehow always is an influence, is Lisa Stone, who Lisa was a former curator for the Randolph Street Galleries and also has an incredible encyclopedic knowledge of the vernacular artworks, art environments. Judd and I used to live on a street called Chestnut Street. And Chestnut Street was also a street that Larry lived on. And Larry lived on the opposite side of the House of Crosses. And there you see, attached to Judd there is a very ridiculous cardboard cutout of one of the, as a sort of homage to the House of the Crosses. This was an extraordinary house that I'm so fortunate that we got to see together before it was, all the crosses were taken down, of a Polish man. Once I believe his grandmother passed, the crosses started to appear on the house of saints, as well as Hollywood stars of the past, as well as former mayors of Chicago. We also lived in a dairy on Winchester Street, where Lawrence, Larry, and Ron Athey, Cherrie, presented the beginnings of that project. And now, sorry, I'm tired, but the piece that you also spoke about. So ghosts were, and also, yes, a sense of ghosts, a sense of what was it to talk to Larry, to channel Larry. And somehow, again, as I was going on the train from New York to Catskill, Nick Wiley was texting me an interview, because Barbara Walters had just died, talking to Katharine Hepburn. And so somehow Katharine Hepburn appeared to channel Larry Steger. And I think, again, there's something about that sense of 90s performance where you are constructing and stacking imagery together through all these different facades and different personas as a way to connect history. And so I think that's something that Judd and I were very deliberately trying to consider and conceive, and also, so what you're seeing here is a sort of an absolute chaotic, doesn't look chaotic, but it was chaotic, sort of bringing together all of these sort of moments. That the lace curtains were very important that are over Judd there, in response to this iconic image of Larry in and amongst this almost like anus or solar portal of his face, and taken into this curtain. So we feel very fortunate to have had this experience, to bring in the ashes, to bring in the House of Crosses, to think about when we used to live on Winchester Street. And also when we were working in the gallery, and again, thanks to Lorelei and Denny and Nora, and I'll wrap up very quickly. When we were there one night, we tried to turn all the lights off, and the lights on Larry would not shut down. And I believe that happened with Matthew as well. And then finally, we got to meet Larry's sisters. They came to the gallery. I believe Matthew was doing a reading the previous night, and they all turned up, and realizing just how incredible they all were and how generous they were. I think 5 of the sisters turned up, and just knowing that sense of time. So yes, channeling the forces of Lawrence, of Dear Larry, and somehow finding perversion and queerness and humor and seriousness and the absurd, and having a good time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark. And Matthew, and all of you who were able to join us tonight. I really appreciate having this opportunity to dive a little bit deeper, just in terms of the curatorial focus, but also all of you artists who were able to share with us, you know, the background on the piece, a deeper understanding too. But you know, I look forward to, following your work. I look forward to encouraging everybody to see this show, but also look to the future in terms of, all the comments that all of you have made too, as the, what things are based on from the past, your current work and the influences, but know the influences for future generations that you have. So as Larry would say, and as was pointed out in the Q&A, document, and to be able to share that for future generations. So thank you all. And we will follow up the program with a survey that will be emailed as well as a recording. So if anyone has any questions, we can pass those on to the artists and the curators too. But again, many thanks for everyone joining us tonight.